This is RiverTalks with Jonathan Brush, President and CEO of Unbound.
Here's an annoying fact of life. Your brain will often actively work to sabotage your life. Now, this is a pretty hardcore fact. Your worldview will determine why you think this is. As a Christian, this makes sense to me in terms of original sin and having a sin nature and all those kinds of things. But this, whatever your worldview is, you will determine how you interpret that. But the reality is still going to be the same. And what I mean by that is that consistently, there will be things that make more sense for you to do, and your brain will want to do something differently. Now, this happens a lot in relationships. Many of us will have sort of self-sabotaging actions that damage and make a problem for our relationships that we do. But I can even explain this in something as simple as, I finish lunch, I take my dishes. Now, logically, the cost-benefit analysis is that if I would just take those dishes and rinse them off and stick them in the dishwasher, that will save a lot of work later. But my brain would prefer that I just set them on the counter and leave them for later. But when I come back in later to do those dishes, the stuff will have dried. It'll be twice as much work to get them clean, and there's just a major problem and more work. And logically, that makes sense. But my brain consistently wants me to just take the lazy way out and set them on the counter. And that's just one example. There's all kinds of places where you can find in your life that your brain will act against you and wants you to do something different. But again, as I said, this takes place a lot in relationships. You'll often act in ways that boost your own status and increase your own situation at the expense of those around you. And ultimately, that will add up and cause damage to those relationships. In the last couple of years, I've had a couple of situations where people I know quite well are in scenarios and situations where there are people who they're dealing with, and they have a situation, they have a solution that makes sense. And the people they're dealing with won't take that solution. They won't listen to them. They won't follow. They won't do anything reasonable. And the concern is, the comment is often like, this is totally unreasonable. This makes so much sense. And why can't they see that? But that's exactly the point. They can't see it. They can't see the situation. They can't see the scenario because their own brains sabotage the scenario for them. And they often aren't able to get the perspective until somebody from the outside holds up a mirror, so to speak, and says, look at it this way. Now, why am I sharing this? What's the point of all this? Well, the point is that this is just one more reason why relationships are so incredibly important. Because left to your own devices, if you are not in a situation where you have relationships in life that hold you accountable and to call you to account for the things that you do and say and the way that you act, that you will little by little act in ways that are at root selfish and kind of build your own status and build your own situation, but doesn't do that in a way that helps your long-term situation. It's all short-term gains. It's putting the dishes on the counter, even though the food's going to dry and it's going to be harder to clean up later. And given enough time, those kinds of patterns and those kinds of consequences, they almost fossilize. They harden, they stiffen, and they become deep personal patterns that are really, really difficult to get out of and habits that are really difficult to break. Now, the antidote to this is to be in relationships with people who call you to account and who you see your actions reflected in. This is most apparent in a family. I remember years ago when I turned and I snapped at one of my daughters, and it was uncalled for. It was unnecessary. It was disproportionate to the situation that was going on, and it was just an ugly thing to do. And I watched my impact of my words and the heat of my words really destroy her. And I could just see the hurt on her. She started to cry. She was pretty little. And it just broke my heart. In other words, I immediately saw the result of my stupidity, of my brain saying, instead of saying, hey, you should take the time and reasonably talk to this child and figure out what's going on. And instead, my brain gave in to this kind of temper. And I snapped and I said something really loud and harsh. And then it just really hurt this child. But I saw it and I saw the results. And I immediately had to take her up my arms and say, oh, I'm so sorry. Would you please forgive me? But I'll tell you what else happened. It put me in a situation where I'm not perfect. And it's not like I've never made mistakes again, but I'm way more careful about what I say to people. I very rarely lose my temper and snap at people because I saw the results of what happens there. And I saw that because I had a relationship with somebody where it was reflected quickly. So, people say all the time relationships are important, but they don't always think about why. They don't look at sort of the deeper issues that's going on here. Being in a relationship with people who not only are your friends, but are the kind of friends and kind of connections that hold you accountable, who you know well enough that you are going to do the stupid things in front of them, and they're going to call you to account for those stupid things, and you're going to have to face those stupid things and pay consequences for it. That sounds painful, and it is in the short run. But in the long run, it's the kind of action, the kind of consequences that keep you from building those long-term, deep-set habits that ultimately end up being destructive and ruining people's lives, specifically your own. So, your brain will work to sabotage you. The way to prevent that is to be around people who will call you to account for the stuff that your brain will suggest that you do and make you take the harder, more difficult, but ultimately better route and better option.